for abortion on demand in developing countries. Today, most African and Latin countries protect the lives of their unborn children, and the real threat to those laws and policies are coming from the United States and European non-governmental organizations and the money behind them. Indeed, prior to January, Mr. Speaker, the pro-life Mexico City policy guaranteed that unborn children in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere not be put at risk of death by the NGOs that we fund. Every human life is precious, Mr. Speaker, and sacred and worthy of respect. No one is expendable. Thus, family planning funds and the NGOs that they empower cannot be allowed to be the Trojan horse for a global abortion industry. On an encouraging note, Americans agree with our efforts to reinstate the Mexico City policy. The Gallup poll recently found that by a margin of 2 to 1, 65% to 35%, Americans oppose President Obama's executive order reversing the Reagan-era Mexico City policy. They support his other executive orders, but not that one. Another Gallup poll found that for the first time, 51% to 42%, Americans are identifying as pro-life. Perhaps ultrasound technology is finally shattering the myth that an unborn child is somehow not a person. Mr. Speaker, stripped of its many euphemisms, abortion is violence against children and often harms women emotionally and psychologically and physically. Abortion methods either dismember the fragile body of a baby to death, or poisons the infant, or chemically induces premature labor, leaving the immature child unable to cope with his or her new environment. You know, in Congress, we often speak and enact laws and policies designed to reduce infant mortality, and that's a wonderful and necessary goal. Can we not see or appreciate or understand that abortion is infant mortality? An unborn child's immaturity and dependence should in no way mitigate, negate, or nullify an unborn child's inherent humanity. Human rights ought to be about inclusion, not exclusion, especially of the weakest and the most vulnerable. Finally, can we not see or appreciate or understand that birth is an event and not the beginning of a child's life? And the stunning breakthroughs over the last 3 decades in treating unborn children who are diagnosed with diseases or disabilities only brings into sharp focus that the child in the womb can be a patient in need of benign interventions, not poison shots or razor-sharp curettes that kill, but medicines and procedures that cure. The Mexico City policy holds children harmless in our family planning programs throughout the world. Tragically, the rule before us precludes so much as a vote on the Mexico City policy. Mr. Speaker, I truly believe that the right to life is the most fundamental human right issue on earth. Unfortunately, abortion and the promotion of abortion is the only violation of that right that has the audacity to call itself a right.
Time has expired.
I will be voting no on the rule as well as the underlying
time has expired. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gentleman is very sincere, and I appreciate his friendship and his words. I would just make one correction, and that is that when he speaks of a 40% increase in this bill, what we are doing in this bill is increasing the transparency from a situation where all the dollars that we're spending here were, in the past few years, put into supplemental bills and pretended like they didn't really count. We're taking that supplemental spending and putting it in a transparent process that we can all appreciate. Mr. Speaker, at this point, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentleman from Florida. Gentleman from Florida.
30 seconds to the gentleman from New Jersey.
Just to make very clear, the population account, the money that was allocated, was just under $460 million. It is now at $648 million. That is approximately a 40% increase. And then other monies potentially could be going to these foreign non-governmental organizations that promote abortion as well, like Planned Parenthood, Restopes International, and others. So we have a very serious problem. They are our surrogates in other countries. They speak for us. Yes, do family planning. Our amendment would leave that intact, would not touch the amount of money for family planning. But we would argue that abortion is not family planning. It's the killing of an unborn child.
Yield 3 minutes to distinguished gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Burton.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank my colleague for yielding. You know, I think the American people would like to see us debate the issues that they're very concerned about on this floor, and there are many of these issues we're not going to be able to debate because of this closed rule. And I'd just like to cite a couple of amendments that I introduced that I think the American people, many of them, would really like to hear debated. One of them was a sense of Congress bill or amendment that would expand the economic sanctions against Iran. Iran is a terrorist state developing nuclear weapons, and a sense of Congress resolution saying we should put severe economic standards on them, sanctions on them, and get our allies to do it is something that should have been debated and passed, because I think the Americans are concerned about this terrorist state, and they want us to stop their nuclear program and to put pressure on them. Another amendment would have prohibited funds from being used to establish diplomatic or commercial ties in or with Iran until these changes are made, until they stop their nuclear development program, which threatens the Middle East, oil supplies, our energy supplies, and the whole world. And then finally, we had one that dealt with putting pressure on terrorist organizations until they recognized Israel's right to exist. I think all of us support Israel, and we want to make sure Israel's right to exist is guaranteed. So why wouldn't we want to have an amendment on the floor which said that the organizations that are trying to destroy Israel should be put under extreme pressure to make sure that they recognize Israel's right to exist? And then finally, one of the things that really concerned me is the United Nations is going to spend almost $900,000 in legal fees for Benon Sevan. He's the man who ran the Oil for Food program, and it was a corrupt program. He was working with Saddam Hussein. The man has fled the country. He's been charged with bribery and wire fraud, and the U.S. federal and state prosecutors are looking for this guy, and they're using our taxpayer dollars to defend him, to help him with his legal fees. And what I said in this amendment was we should withhold the amount of money that would go for his legal fees from our commitment to the United Nations. And I think the American people would agree with that. So I can't understand why the chairman and the members of the Rules Committee didn't make these in order. I hope in the future they'll be a little more open-minded about this, because the American people want these issues debated in the people's house. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida reserves. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes. The gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I want to just rise to thank Chairwoman Nita Lowey and Ranking Member Kay Granger for their great work on this bill, and focus particularly on this bill's commitment to global development issues. I am the chair of the Terrorism Subcommittee on Armed Services and have been working very, very closely with our military as we attempt to combat terrorism and violent extremist groups throughout the globe. And certainly there's a big military component to that. But what we have increasingly learned in the military and elsewhere is that we will never win that battle in that fight if we are not equally committed to global development. We have seen a major commitment in this bill on the central focus in our efforts right now, which is in Pakistan and Afghanistan. I applaud that effort, but also understand that this bill recognizes that it is broader than just Pakistan and Afghanistan. Throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, throughout Southeast Asia, failed and failing states are a major contributor to instability and the rise of violent extremist groups. Getting our global development policy right is critical to stopping that effort. This bill makes that commitment. I also want to say that this is not just a matter of more money. It is a matter of improving the quality of our global development, of coordinating it, of figuring out what works and making sure that our programs are more efficient and more effectively delivered. And on that point, I also support the committee and support the Foreign Relations Committee and Foreign Affairs Committee as well for putting pressure on the administration to make fundamental changes in the way we do global development, to make sure that it is better coordinated, more effective, and works better. We have a lot of work to do on that front, but this appropriation bill reflects the priority of global development policy, funding it and supporting it if we are ever to be triumphant in our efforts to stop violent extremist groups and reduce instability throughout the globe. So thank you for the opportunity, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California reserved. Gentleman from Florida.
Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mack.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to thank my colleague as well for yielding.